All right, so we have a major breaking story right now about messages that were exchanged between Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta about Jon Jones that were pretty nasty at the time, having to do with a negotiation that was going on between the organization and Jon. And, Dana never thought that anyone was going to see these messages. He sent them to Lorenzo Fertitta about a fighter who was driving a hard bargain. I don't even know if you even call it a hard bargain. When you get into the details of what was actually happening at the time when these messages were sent, it's all very notable information. And if you go into anybody's text message, you're all, hey, what'd you say to this guy about this guy? And you know what I mean? Like you and your best friend, there's going to be some nasty stuff in there. But nonetheless, the much more important part of this story has to do with where this came out. It came out in the class action lawsuit as part of a deposition that Dana was giving to the plaintiff's attorney about a bunch of stuff related to the negotiations that they have had between the organization and the fighters through that time period. And I hope that watching this video should provide value to people who watch it, just because these are the videos I feel most confident that I can provide very unique insight into these topics, just because I've done this kind of thing a lot. And then we're going to also talk about a story that broke in the exact same identical vein that Ariel broke about Conor McGregor and his contract status. I cannot believe no one's talking about this. As soon as I heard Ariel talk about it, I wrote it down in my notes. I was like, oh my God, it's something I had speculated about that I did not have confirmation on, and Ariel confirmed it. And it's anybody speculating about who, when, and where Conor's going to fight. If they're not talking about this, then they are not a solid source as soon as the business side of things comes into it, because the business side is ultimately what is going to drive everything when it comes to Conor McGregor, and his contract status is incredible. I mean, there's nothing more important. And now we know a critical detail about his contract status that is going to inform us on what we can expect next. So that is what we're going to do. I'm going to try to give you guys the best show that I can on this one, because I always do that, actually. I'm going to try to give you the best show. I would appreciate it if you guys would subscribe. If you watch my content, that's all I ask. Hit subscribe once, and then if you like the video, or you could just do me a solid and like the video, even if you don't like it. So let's jump into this thing, and let's start with this story. All right. So obviously the headline is F that punk. Unsealed docs reveal Dana White's reaction to Jon Jones' money demands. All right. So he was talking trash about Jon Jones, but why? Why was that happening? So it was May 24th, 2014. The UFC wanted to book a rematch between Jones and Alexander Gustafsson, who 7 months earlier had pushed the then light heavyweight champion to his very limit at UFC 165. The holdup, according to White, was that Jones wanted to fight Daniel Cormier next instead of Gustafsson, and negotiations on a contract extension had snagged on that detail. Jones wouldn't sign. So that's the backdrop. Okay, it's 2014. This is before things really went sideways with Jon Jones when he DUI hit the pregnant lady. But this is the text that Dana sent. He said, "What's up with Jones? Did he straighten up, or is he still being a scumbag?" He sent that to then chairman Fertitta in a message recently unsealed as part of the UFC antitrust lawsuit. And Fertitta says, "Still a douche, but we're inching closer. Haven't moved on money, but sent the letter with an ultimatum." Awesome. White responded, "Fuck that punk Lorenzo. He needs to know we don't need him, or he will fuck us over more than he already does." All right, so that's what he sent. That's what he sent. He said he needs to know we don't need him, or else he will fuck us over more than he already does. Now, why is that notable? Because why are they talking about this, right? They're talking about this because they're about to depose Dana White. If you don't know what a deposition is, it basically is like if there's a subject of a lawsuit, the attorneys can request to depose them, which means they get to sit them down and ask them a million questions about certain things relevant to the case. So they present to the judge, oh, look, we have these text messages. We want to depose Dana White and make him explain what he meant with these text messages. And the reason that this is relevant is because the entire basis of the lawsuit is whether or not the UFC was implementing illegal tactics to suppress the actual value that fighters were worth in the market. So Dana is saying, this is a contract negotiation with one of their fighters. And so they're like, oh, yeah, this is relevant. And candidly, I would expect most judges to understand contract negotiations about 1/10 as well as Dana, and about, 1/3 and 1/5 as well as me. Like I'll throw it to Dana. He's done it a lot more than me, but I would not expect a judge to have much experience with contract negotiations like this. And so they read that, they're all, oh yeah, this is a super relevant thing that you should be able to ask about. Not. How would this be relevant to whether they implemented illegal tactics? Okay, and I'll tell you exactly what I mean in a second. So we go, so then they're like, Jones was still one way. Okay, actually, this is really important. Jones had 5 fights. With 5 fights left on Jones's contract, White and Fertitta's mission was to lock up the champion for more time. In doing so, they unknowingly provided a window into negotiating tactics that are now the center of the court case over whether they broke the law by locking fighters into long-term contracts, keeping competitors from being able to compete in the market for MMA fighters. Plaintiffs to the UFC antitrust lawsuit claim that such contracts were part of an illegal scheme to depress fighter salaries. Okay, so bottom line though, okay, before I even start to get into what they ask Dana and all that, this is irrelevant to the central question, which is, did long-term contracts violate some kind of antitrust law, right? They call it's a monopsony or whatever, where it's not a monopoly, it's a monopsony where they become the only player in the market able to offer these contracts. So like there's no other competitors. So basically, UFC just got rid of all the competitors, and so they could depress their salaries. And the way that they were able to do that is by buying all of the other competitors, and then also locking up all of the fighters into long-term contracts. So no competitor would be able to compete with them because they can't get any stars, because the stars are locked into long-term contracts with the UFC. Okay. So that's the basis of their argument. How would this conversation have anything to do with that, instead of them just like, it's like you've already established that all of the things I just said are established. They're basically established facts. They locked guys, they got guys to sign multi-fight deals that locked them up for a long time, right? And other companies had a hard time competing. Okay, cool, right? Is that illegal? I don't know. But this particular situation, so they're deposing Dana White about this. And I want you, explain to me how the answer to these questions informs anything about the central question. All right. So, in an unsealed back and forth, White reminded plaintiff's lawyer that in the subject of his text hadn't always been a model citizen inside or outside the cage. Okay. So this is the attorney says, so you wanted Mr. Fertitta to let Mr. Jones know that the UFC didn't need him. And White responds, yeah. And then he asked Dana, and be a scumbag in negotiations? And White says, no. Do you know Jones's history? Just be a scumbag in life. I mean, you could pretty much, you could ask every guy who works for me to testify that, yes, I was not happy with Jon Jones' life choices. Okay. So, I mean, bottom line, then they get into this whole thing about Jon Jones supporting Francis Ngannou, leaving the organization. And actually, this is actually kind of relevant too. So, Jones would later sit out for 3 years amid another contract dispute with the UFC over his potential play for the super fight with then UFC champion Francis Ngannou. And White again publicly blasted Jones at the time, claiming that he asked for an obscene amount of money, $30 million, or what a boxing champion Deontay Wilder was paid for his bout with Tyson Fury to take a fight. Ngannou said that it makes sense. I think for a mega fight, everyone would like to have mega pay. The same as mine. I want that fight. Yeah. So he wanted mega pay. Jon Jones wanted mega pay. Yada, yada, yada. Okay. So that's interesting. Like, of course they want mega pay. I want $30 million for this video. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't necessarily jive with reality, but nonetheless. Okay. So they asked Dana, like, so, you wanted Jon Jones to know that you guys didn't need him? And he's like, yeah. And it's like, okay, what is that? What is that supposed to, of course he wants them to know they don't need him. Like, what, it's like, hi, like step 1 negotiation. What is your leverage? What can you threaten the other party with if they don't give you what you want? That is literally, I mean, like, if you want to put negotiations in the most simple possible terms, I want this. I want this. We are miles apart. Okay, well, so we need to come to the middle. Well, why does this person have more power than the other one? Is if this one needs this one more than this one needs this one. That's generally speaking exactly what dictates how the thing ends up. Now, the plaintiff's case is that, well, if we would have had all these other organizations offering us tons of money, then that would have made our options larger and would have driven our value up. All right, that's not unreasonable to say, but the thing is, there are 0 other profitable MMA companies. None. In history. There are none. There is not another profitable MMA promotions company. None. You have one, UFC. That's it. Whether UFC bought Strikeforce or whether they bought Elite XC or whether they bought Pride or whatever, those were not profitable companies. They didn't sell because they were doing well. They sold because they weren't making enough money to cover their expenses. Okay? So just as a baseline, that is very important to understand. I'm not saying the UFC pays the fighters enough or whether they're screwing them or they're not. That's not what I'm saying. But anyway, bottom line is, in the negotiation, if Jon Jones thinks that the UFC needs him, then the UFC ends up having to give him whatever he wants whenever he asks for it. Like, the bottom line, and this is really important to understand going into this Conor conversation, because that is a really serious situation. Very, very much more serious than the Jon Jones one. So when they asked Dana White, you want him to know he doesn't need it, it's like, that's literally like asking a person who is like swimming in a pool. It's like, hey, are you, this is the dumbest example ever. Just think of the most obvious thing ever. Okay. Whatever the most obvious thing that you could think of is, that's that question. Okay. That is like step one of anybody who knows anything about negotiations. Yeah, of course. I want him to know that we don't need him, because that takes away his ability to because the only leverage a fighter has who still has 4 or 5 fights on his contract is for them to say, I'm just going to sit out. Okay. Now, does that create an incentive for UFC to not want to overpay guys? 100%. I've always said that. You make a guy too rich, and then all of a sudden, that all you're doing is giving him tremendous leverage to negotiate against you, because he doesn't need the money now. So why would he want to come back and fight unless you pay him an astronomical amount of money? Okay. I'm not saying it's a perfect business model or whatever, but at the end of the day, that's just a fact. Okay. So knowing or having the fighter know that the UFC can move on without them is critical to their situation. So it's a dumb question. And him calling Jon a scumbag for refusing to sign a bout agreement because of this, that, or the other. I mean, I don't know much of the backstory, but if Dana said he's going to screw us over more than he already has, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if I knew everything about the situations that Dana was referencing, I'm going to say pretty strong that that's exactly what happened. If I've heard people be like, Jesse's a shill for the UFC. That's not it at all. I have been on the other side of this thing. Okay. Most people have not. It's not like I'm not some elitist. Okay. Like, I didn't have like wild success doing it. I've just been on the other side. I've been the person who was running the company and then is trying to put things together with a bunch of people who have no understanding whatsoever of what goes into actually creating the thing that generates the money that enables me to employ all of you guys, and then dealing with them thinking they understand and then demanding this and demanding that. Like, I'm sitting around like just oh man, just so much money at the expense of these guys, when it's the like exact opposite, where I'm running around floundering, and so I always at least look at it from both sides. And, like as an example that they referenced in the article, when Jon refused to fight Chael Sonnen on short notice and they had to cancel the entire event. Like, dude, it's the only time that's ever happened. And, back then, and this is like earlier, much earlier UFC, they weren't rolling in dough like they are now. And it's like, as soon as, like, if I'm Jon Jones in that situation, as soon as they go, listen, man, we're going to actually have to cancel this event. Like, honestly, the way to get me to do it in that situation would have been, I'm sure that maybe they offered him a little bit more money, but for me, it would have been like, look, dude, I'm not saying, but for me, if they were like, I'm just going to be straight with you. All right. If you don't take this fight, we're going to have to cancel the entire event. And at the end of it, none of these other fighters are going to get paid. All of this, all the money we spent promoting this thing, all the work that everybody did going into this, it's all for nothing. We're just going to have to scrap the whole thing. Absolutely for sure, I'd take the fight. Absolutely for sure. If you put that on me, I'm taking the fight. I just am. I can't tell you it's for anything more noble than like the thought of all of them how like the loss at all of them and then being like it's that guy's fault. I mean, it could, if I'm not psychiatristing myself, but maybe it would just come down to that. I'm like, I don't want all those people to think that it's my fault that they did it. Fuck it, I'll just fight the guy, But at the end of the day, I just wouldn't do it. That seems pretty crazy that he straight up didn't do it knowing they were going to cancel the event. But, Dana calling him a scumbag, is that nice? No. Is it not nice? No. It's neither. Dana calling him these names is neither nice nor not nice because he's talking to someone else in a private conversation that the guy's never going to see. Okay? 10 years later, in a lawsuit, this comes up and he has to explain himself. That's not normal life. Think about the meanest things you've said about another person to one of your best friends. And it's like, you never thought they were going to see it. Now, the best people in the world only say nice things about people. And I, generally speaking, do actually try to implement that as much as possible. Like if someone's one of my friends and they're wondering whether I've ever spoken negatively about them, the odds are pretty much very, very small. If we've never done any business together or anything like that, odds that I've said anything negative about you are incredibly, incredibly slim because I don't do that. I used to do that when I was younger and I learned my lesson. It's like, dude, nothing good ever comes from that. It's much better to just stay in good terms with everybody. Just be nice. But in a negotiation, that's a completely different thing. You got to understand, Jon has a signed contract with them. And I know people are like, oh, renegotiations, whatever. And that's not untrue. But you do have a signed agreement that you agreed to with an organization. I mean, at the end of the day, like you agreed to those terms. When you signed it, you were like, I agree to this. It's not a small deal, dude. It's really not a small deal. Like that's an agreement. And should people get to renegotiate if their value changes? Of course. Of course. But the organization is not unreasonable being like, you did agree to these terms, whatever. Do I think this is going to have a big impact on anything related to Jones coming back or anything like that? No, I would be very curious to see the text messages Dana sent once he started, holding out for Francis and was asking for $30 million, which is absurd. I mean, that really is absurd. If you don't know why, it's about the business model. Boxing and mixed martial arts boxing and UFC are not the same at all. They're just not the same at all. Because these, the boxing business, they're all these one-off events. It's like the difference between running Disneyland, or running a haunted house that runs for a weekend during Halloween. It's a one-time deal. And then you make a bunch of money and you just split it amongst the people versus this huge organism that is constantly working, constantly paying everybody. Running the UFC must cost an astronomical amount. I mean, obviously we know basically exactly what it costs because they're a publicly traded company, but it's not the same thing. Not to mention the fact everybody keeps coming back to this now. They look at the UFC's profits, okay, and they go, the UFC only pays the fighters X amount of the of the total revenue or whatever. And they're like, look at how much money they actually made at the end of the year. And they're like, this is a huge number, right? But the owners of the UFC paid $4.5 billion cash for the company, okay? Like they outlaid $4.5 billion for the company. So when you see the company profited, say, $300 million or whatever it is, I haven't looked it up, but like let's say they profited $300 million. You're like, look at that, dude. If they paid that out to the fighters, blah, 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 blah. It's like, all right, but like, what about the guys that outlaid $4.5 billion? You know what I mean? Like, when do they get paid back? Well, the company's worth much more now. Okay, that's not untrue. It's a good investment, whatever. But I'm just saying, like, they outlaid $4.5 billion in cash. They shouldn't be able to get paid back. I don't know. And my issue with how the UFC did, and I haven't studied the contracts. And like I said, if I sound totally one-sided on this, it's probably because I have not seen the plaintiff's full case. It's just every time that I get a glimpse into the case, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with this. Like, this is what you got. There's nothing here. My issue from like rumors and things that I've heard, has always been around the extensions and how they lock guys in for a really long period of time where it's not simple terms. Like if it was just like 6-fight deal, we have to offer you at least 2 fights per year, the end, you know, if you're injured, I mean, that's like a natural extension, right? We offered you a fight, you couldn't fight. So until you come back from your injury, that's your extension, right? If it was just like that, I would have no issue with them. Like, you signed a 10-fight deal. That's, dude, you're the one who signed it, right? The issue is where is like these clauses that would be in contracts that would extend guys for all kinds of stuff, which basically locked them in, like they couldn't get out of their contracts. Sunset clause changed that, and you know, that is going to change the UFC's business if they continue to give people sunset clauses, which means that there's a certain date where they get out of their contract, which is exactly how Francis Ngannou got out of his contract. And yeah, so I'm going to be honest with you guys. I just talked for 21 minutes, so I'm not going to do the Conor McGregor video in this video. I'm going to do it in a separate video. And if you enjoyed this video, then you should definitely watch that one, because that one has wild implications in the future of this business. So anyway, that's what I got. Subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. Love you guys. Bye-bye.